Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to go through a quite esoteric topic, which is trying to get video output working for a graphical environment on my custom Zynq-7000 board. In a previous video I showed I have character-based or console type of output working just fine. That continues to work well, along with USB input for the keyboard. So I've got essentially a little Linux system. And I have changed my SD card so that I'm not using a RAM drive. I just actually run directly off the SD card. So it essentially acts like a little Linux workstation, which is actually quite nice. But I'm trying to get in and run like StartX as an example to get into this environment, and it fails. And I'm not finding a lot of good resources out there to troubleshoot it. And for me, this is just a knowledge gap. I'm learning a lot about Linux, and there's just so much I don't know. But then there's also, I think, just issues about drivers and PetaLinux and whatever else it might be. So being that I've kind of hit a dead end though, I thought I would put out a video and just kind of show you where I'm at. And I know some of you have had experience with this or probably have some helpful pointers. And so if you've got thoughts on things I could look at, should look at, missing that are maybe it's more obvious to you, drop me a note in the video below. That would be wonderful. Maybe also at the end of this video, I'll introduce something else I'm going to try to experiment with, which may also be a potential dead end road, but it's a USB to VGA adapter. Wondering, can it also be used as a potential video output on this type of a board? But maybe I'll start out with what's on the screen here. What you're seeing on the main top window right now that says windowed projector HDMI only, that is the actual HDMI output coming out of my custom board. So I have a cable going from my HDMI port on my board into an HDMI capture device on my Linux workstation, and I'm just showing this through an OBS window. Behind that are two windows. I've got one window here, which is just a PuTTY window that's connected to my device through USB serial. And then I have another window over here that I can connect, and I'll do a network connection. So I'll connect as the user PetaLinux, and I have an IP address on my system that I will connect to. And now I'm logged into it. So I have three different ways. I'm a network connection, a serial connection, and then just the direct HDMI output. And I have a separate keyboard on my desk in front of me that is connected into the USB of my board. So I'll use that keyboard for this screen here, and I'll use my workstation for the other screens. Maybe what I'll do, step one though, is to show you what is it that I'm getting for an error. So I'm going to slide this HDMI output over a little bit, and I'll have PuTTY up here on the left. So PuTTY is going to show me in this window here really the serial debug output information as the system boots. And on the right, you're going to see what is the experience from the actual monitor plugged in to an HDMI connection. Again, I've got a capture device, but it'll show you what that represents. So I'm going to go ahead and press the reset button on my board here. And it's going to go ahead and boot up. And on the left, you're seeing it's going through all of this boot process. It's finding my USB devices, getting my Ethernet up and running. It's setting up my whatever it might be for my video support on this. But then at the end of it, you can see it came up with an error, segmentation fault at address, and that's when I'm trying to get basically this X server running. Now on the right, the console output is working fine, so I can log into that. I can say, okay, let's log in. And then I'm logged in, and I can now see that I'm working with that fine. But if I say start X, it fails. I don't know if I should need to say sudo start X. I don't think that's necessary, but if I do that just as a test, I get something a little bit different for behavior. I don't know if I'll catch it on the video recording very well here, but the screen does flash. So I can tell it's trying to flip video modes or doing something. So it flashes and then it comes back, and And it's coming back with that same error. It's a segmentation fault at address 0x8. And then it says caught signal 11. So I guess, what I found just searching that, there's a few examples of someone that's run into that I found, but it seems like what they were doing and what I'm doing were different. But my understanding is a segmentation fault is something that's trying to access memory in a space, in an area, memory range that it's not supposed to be trying to access. So that's something that I need to track down of, well, okay, what's trying to access memory at that address space. Now, if I go back over to my PuTTY, I can scroll up to maybe where I started the boot process, and that'd be right in this space here. So right here is where I would have pressed that reset. So my U-boot, I go through and I see my processor information. So it's this Zynq-7000 is the specific Zynq-7000 I'm working with. I've got a gig of RAM, and I'll kind of just keep going down through this. And if I scroll, I'm going to see things in here that have to do with the video. That's what I might pay attention to, see if I can catch as I scroll through this. So a bunch of stuff here on this AMBA. Looks like setting up some dependencies, and in that I do see that I've got my PL bus and this Digilent HDMI driver I'm using. So it's seeing that fine. I keep going down. It's going to get into all my USB stuff. Here I've got more Xilinx stuff. So probing this AXI VDMA engine, and I've got this bridge. See some of that's being probed. I keep on going down through this. Just looking for anything that might be an error or some other problem. I can see it's getting into my Dell keyboard. It found that. It found I have a 7-port USB hub plugged into the USB port on my Zynq-7000, so it detects that. I do have a mouse plugged in at the moment, so it detects the mouse. All good there. Then I noticed that it's loading up this clock and the Digilent HDMI driver. I'm loading those as out of tree modules, so I get a little, I suppose that's a warning or a message that it taints the kernel. And then some DRM type of logging, again, representing here that it's using this Digilent HDMI driver. A frame buffer device, that line there. And I get to the network, then it's trying to start this X server, and then that's where things stop. But that's the end that ideally would have started into my X server at this point. Now maybe some things that I could point out. Maybe I will jump over here and I can look at, this is Vivado, and again I have a block diagram that looks like this, and in that block diagram I'm using the Zynq processing system. If I scroll to the right, I am using this AXI VDMA, so an AXI video direct memory access that I'm using. I've got this clock that I'm using, video timing controller. There's this AXI4 stream to video out, and an RGB to DVI, and an AXI GPIO. But I was going to point out the memory address information over here, just in case I've got something incorrect there. But this is showing that for that video direct memory access, I'm starting at 0 and I'm going to the end of the 1 gig range. And then I have in the processing system these addresses for some registers. Kind of take a look at the first one here. And this is for that VDMA, is at 43000000. Now with that, I did in my PetaLinux build, thinking that maybe there's some memory address problem going on here, what's getting to this 0x8 that shouldn't be. I can go into my specific project and project spec, not that. See the meta user, recipes for BSP, device tree files, and eventually get down to this user DTSI. So this is my device tree here in PetaLinux. And you can take a look at what's here, but I'm going to scroll down, and probably what's of interest is this section here. So I have the Digilent HDMI configured this way. I also have this Xilinx programmable logic display piece here set up, and that is referencing this DMA, this AXI VDMA, which I have down here. And I have updated this, and I believe this is correct. So I'm telling it that, you know, my register is over here at this address, and that it's a 64K register, and that should match what is over here, if I've got that right. So I have that added in. I didn't have that before. DMA ranges, I still have at this line. I have experimented with that and not seen any change, but I believe this is the correct. So the DMA start address, the processor start address, and the range, but maybe that's incorrect. I did update my block diagram so that I'm using 4 frames, and that's what this is specifying also, so that should match up to that. And right now I have this commented out, but I've experimented with that too and not had any luck. And I've got my clock set up, this VTC down here, GPIO, but you can see what I have in. This is probably the most important part, I think, when it comes to trying to get all this video working. And the best I can tell, that is configured correctly, but there are so many details I could easily be missing something or have the wrong information. Then I could maybe get over, you know, to my system itself and point out a few things. So if I start with this and I get that error, you know, I can come in here and say, well, let's go look at that error. Switch to my other keyboard here. So I might say, well, show me var log xorg log, and I can read through this. And so there is something on the kernel command line at the very end there that says video equals sys USB2VGA. You can ignore that. That thing doesn't exist yet, and it's not plugged in right now anyways. But I scroll through this, and if I go to the next page, it's adding this DRM device, dev DRI card 0. I keep reading through this. Matched FB dev, auto configured driver 1. And I keep scrolling down. Get towards the bottom of that, it's falling back to the old probing method, FB dev HW. But then I get to this point that it does start to set up, or it's probing the video capture device in this case, or if I had my monitor plugged in instead, it'd be probing it. But if I go to the next page, you'll start to see that it's out there communicating. In this case, it says the manufacturer is HJW model 1836, serial number, whatever. I think that's just the video capture device I'm using. If I plug in my little Lenovo screen instead, then it shows, I believe it was LEN as the vendor. So I think it's pulling information from the capture device right now. I can see that it has supported timings there, and you know, it's basically pulling information from the screen. There's the EDID blob of information, and I'm going to kind of keep on going here. And it makes it through all of that. So it seems like it's talking to the display device. Again, in this case, is a capture device. But then it starts initializing these extensions. And the last extension I see it hit is this DRI2. And then I get into my segmentation fault. Now, I don't know if DRI2 is actually where the issue is coming from. It shouldn't be. But I have tried to also disable DRI2, and that hasn't made any difference. I still get this initializing extension. But that's what I'm getting in that log file. Now, I could go out and look at the actual config files. So The config file for this would be in this folder. And if I do a directory there, you can see that I have these files. And right now I do not have an active config file. So it's trying to start without a config file because I got xorg.conf with an underscore. So it's not the file that it's looking for. But what I can do is copy over one that I have prepared. So have an xorg.conf HDMI output is the one, and I'll just copy that to xorg.conf without the underscore. Sudo on that. And so now if I go out and I do a listing, you can see I have an xorg.conf. And let me just look at that file. And so I'm setting up a screen layout, screen 0. Here is my screen 0 then. I'm going to tell it to use device 0, monitor 0, turn off acceleration. And I'm just experimenting like that. That line I could take out and it's not really having any effect anyways. Default depth is 24. Not even picking a resolution right now, but I could pick a resolution like with this modes. I get down to my device and I'm using, in this case, mode setting for the driver. And I'm telling it, if it's using this option, I'm not sure, but I'm telling it that it's on FB0. And it is FB0, that is this screen, I'm pretty sure. So I do have an FB0. That might have been an option in one of the PetaLinux config tools, was to expose it as an FB0. So I think that is correct. And I can go look at something here quick, see if it helps verify that. Then I have my monitor and my server flags where I'm telling it not to auto add, in this case, if I use this file. So I'll get out of that and I'll try doing a start X again. Let's see. Connection refused. Maybe I'll do a sudo start X. And again, I see the screen flash, but then I get back to the exact same error. So this 0x8 segmentation fault press. Now, if I do a listing of what's in my dev, you can see I do have FB0 there. And I think if I go in and I do like a listing of sys class graphics FB0 device driver, gives me that information. And I think I can get a little more information here, but it just shows that it's basically this PL bus, the Xilinx PL display that's being used for that. And that all seems fine. You know, I can look at what modules are loaded, and it does show that I got that clock module. It doesn't show that this digital HDMI is currently in use, but when it boots up, it's showing that it's getting called there. So I'm not sure if this should show a 1 here at this point or not. And I'm just kind of scanning through my notes and seeing if there's anything else here that'd be worth looking at. Those are probably the big things. And we're probably just looking not quite 20 minutes into this video, so I'll probably wrap this portion up here. But what you're seeing is that I'm failing to get this to run. I'll just do a sudo start X, and I'm getting that specific error. With or without an xconfig file, which I could have things very wrong in that file. And so if anybody's catching something there that you would suggest I would look at, back into that. This is what I'm using at the moment. That very bottom one, there should be the server flags to turn off DRI. Let me delete that. And no difference. I think if I go in, just going to flip to the end of the log. And again, it's the last thing I see is it trying to initialize this DRI2. So maybe I'm not properly setting that, or that has nothing to do with the actual issue. But maybe questions I have, is there something that I need to set a DMA range or a register address range somewhere, either on a driver or something on a kernel or some other location in PetaLinux that I'm not sure of, and I'm going to continue to kind of read and dig on that a little bit. But if anybody has any ideas of things that I could take a look at, should take a look at up to this point, do let me know. Maybe I'll pivot here just for a real quick 5 minutes and talk about, I have one of these little USB to VGA adapters. It uses a USB chipset, I think it's a NET 2280, and then it uses a little video chipset, which is an SIS 315 or SIS 315. I'm going to go ahead and plug that in, and I just have this little USB hub that I'm using, and I'm going to plug in that device. And when I plug in that device, I might go ahead and restart my computer here. So let me, when I say computer, the Zynq-7000 system. So over here, I have PuTTY running still. I'm going to leave that there. Off to the right is my HDMI output. And maybe I'll just come in here, do a okay, so the system is going to reset here. And you can see my HDMI output cleared at that point. It's going through the boot process. You can see the output on the left. Now I have a secondary screen plugged in right now to that USB to VGA adapter. And while it was booting up, and I'll maybe actually get over to this screen and just highlight it. Let's see if, yeah, stop, let me scroll up. You know, I see all my HDMI, the stuff I pointed out before, but now in addition, find it, there is going to be this output device that it finds. There's this section right here that when I turn on my system now with this device plugged in, it does detect it. So again, I'm going from my custom board, my Zynq-7000 board, out its USB host port into a USB hub, a 7-port hub. And in that hub right now, I've got a USB keyboard, USB mouse, and this USB to VGA adapter. And it detects it. And it says it found that dongle, it gave it 8 output buffers, and it's got a whopping 8 meg SD RAM. So that all is a good sign, and the device has a little LED and it's lit up, and when it hits that, I do see that the output of that screen looks like it's changing modes or something. It goes to all black, and then it goes back to kind of the no signal type of output, which is a device puts a little orange border around the screen. And so it starts out with an orange border, it initializes here, it flips to an all black screen. Then once it's done with that, it flips back to this orange border. But what I want to work on is, can I use that device as the primary, just setting aside the HDMI for a little bit, can I get it working as the primary display output just for the fun of it? And that I'm going to assume needs something that I'm going to have to set on the kernel level side of things. There's probably some other driver connectivity that I need here. Now I have gone in, let's see, I'll open up a new, this way I'm going to go into, have my PetaLinux installation. I can go ahead and open terminal. Just get going here with the PetaLinux tool set. And then if I want, let's see, I'm going to check 2 things. There is the faster one to get in and out of is to configure the, maybe the rootfs. And then I could look in here and see, is there anything around this SIS? And then, okay, there's nothing here in this one. So let me then get into my kernel. And there are some things in here for loading up support for that device. And I do have those, I think, enabled, so I'll validate that here when this comes up. And that's enough for it to detect it, but not enough necessarily that I can, come over here. Let me get out of this. Again, this is over in PuTTY, but maybe I go to Dev and I do a listing there. I don't have an FB1. I just have that FB0. I'm supposed to get an FB1. I think so if this was all working fine. But I'm not sure what I would expect to see other than that here. And maybe I need to put something into my DTSI file, the device tree for this USB device. Possibly. I don't know. I can't find any examples of what you would put in there. Or maybe there's something that I have to connect the dots here inside of Linux that I've not done yet. Over in the kernel, if I do search for, I think it's FB sys, I can come in here and just look at a few things here. There are these drivers, which I've had enabled, so I'm not sure why this is showing this is not enabled. But first of all, there's a 315 driver, and right now it says it's not enabled for some reason. And what I'm looking at here is it says, okay, under drivers, graphic support, frame buffer devices, support for frame buffer device drivers, I have turned on, but then this one I do not have on. And so that is going to require FB-sys to be turned on, which right now I have not on. So I'm going to scroll up and look at FB-sys. And that doesn't have PCI enabled. So I at one point I turned off PCI for troubleshooting. So if I want to turn on the PCI, it seems like I'm going to have to come in here then under device drivers PCI support. So let me go do that. Device drivers. Oh, it's right at the very, very top one. That's nice. Okay, so there's my PCI support. But now if I go back and I search for that FB-sys, it shows that PCI support is on now, and then I can go in to graphics support frame buffer devices. So let me go do that. So device drivers, oh, check I hit that right. Sys. Yeah, device drivers, graphics support. So in device drivers, and I'll get down to graphics support. And then there's a frame buffer devices down here. And that has support there. And then I can come down to this right here. SIS display support, yes. And I'm going to use this one here, which is the SIS 315. Now this all required PCI support. So it could be that this driver will not work through USB, and I would need a PCI interface, possibly. So maybe these are not the right drivers that will work for what I need here. But then I could get out of all of this. Let me just check one more time, make sure. So I'm doing a slash just to do a search. I'm searching for FB-sys. It now says, yep, FB-sys is enabled. All the dependencies are turned on. The 300 one is off, but then I've got the 315 one turned on. So that all looks good. So then I should be able to exit out of all that. And then let it go through and build up. Now I've had that on before and that's not made a difference. So I think there's something else I'm missing there, but I'll leave it at that. If any of you have thoughts, if you've used this type of SYS 315 chip, especially the USB-based one, like this USB2VGA, and have any pointers there, I would be grateful for any suggestions. But what I'm finding is that this then boots, and I don't have a I don't have it as a valid output, and definitely the X server or the X11 doesn't recognize it, but I think that's not getting far enough because of that that other error that I was previously talking about. I think I probably have to change some things in my PetaLinux build so that it tries to use this USB adapter instead of the HDMI output as the console screen when it turns on. That's all research I've got to do here. But at this point, I've got the kernel built with that. Just as a test, I should be able to go back into my kernel config and make sure it still shows that that is working. It seems like the PCI stuff I had previously turned back on. So it was interesting that it was off there. But from here, I would real quickly package the files, put them on my SD card, boot the SD card. But like I said, I've got work to do to try to tell it that that's a primary screen, if I even have enough drivers to make that work. And I'll post an update if I learn more on that, but that's it for now. So looks like half an hour into this video, so thanks for following. Appreciate any input or tips from anybody. I'm going to just kind of keep hacking away at this PetaLinux stuff. It's kind of painful and kind of fun at the same time. So maybe real quick here to tack on to the end of this video, I did go back into the kernel setting again and noticed that it still had not turned on the PCI stuff, even though I had set that. So I went back and looked at my config files, and I noticed that in the BSP file, it was commented out, and then in the later two files, it was to put it back in the PCI setting. So I deleted the comment out of the PCI in the BSP config because it seemed like it was hitting that and stopping and not overriding that with these later files, which is what I thought it was supposed to do. But anyways, I did that, and I went back into the kernel and made sure that it did retain the PCI setting and then the FB sys drivers, basically. So at this point, I do have that kernel rebuilt. That just took a few minutes to run through that. But what I can do is get this over to an SD card. First, I'll have to be in my images Linux. I can run this command, and that's good to go. I have an SD card in there now, and I'm going to go ahead and get the rootfs set up with this command, just extracting one of those files over to the second partition. And then while it's doing that, manually just copy these files over to boot partition. Okay, so then once that's done, this down here, I can eject this and put that SD card into my board and boot it up. I'm not expecting any different behavior yet because I know I still somewhere have to tell it to use that or to try to use that as the console output. Not even worried about trying to get into a graphical environment yet. Okay, I'm going to pop the card out of my board. Looks like this other one just finished up, so good timing. Let me eject. Oh, it's still writing. Okay, can be removed. Okay, and it's removed. Okay, so let me pull that out of my workstation. I'm putting this little SD card into my board, and I'll go ahead and reset. So we'll see that here on the serial output. And get my output window back up over here. Okay, let me get logged in. It's a new image, so I've got to set my password for the first time. And then I'm going to go to here. And there is no config file. And so what I could try doing is setting it up with this file for the USB, but USB to VGA. But ideally what I'd be able to do here is just do a start X. Same error as I was seeing before. This was without a configuration file. Sudo start X. See the screen flash, no difference there. Again, it's trying to, I'm sure, use the HDMI, but if I go into the log file, it's just looking for a default monitor, and I don't know how it would know to go to the USB one versus the HDMI one, which I don't think it's even seen what it needs to see for the USB to even recognize it. If I go to dev, I've only got FB0, which is my HDMI output, I'm pretty sure. But what I maybe could do is in here, I'm just going to jump to the terminal so I can copy some stuff over quick. I'll go over to X11, Xorgs, basically that same folder. And I will do a edit of file that doesn't exist here, xorg.conf. And I do have, I've just kind of been keeping a copy of this that I can go put in here. And I'll paste this in. And oops, this probably has both monitors set up in it, which I don't want. So real quickly, I'm going to take out, let's just maybe update this to say screen 1. So here I've got screen 0, which is tended to be my HDMI output. So I'm going to just erase all of that. So screen 1, this is connected to my USB to VGA. Here's all my HDMI output. And then ideally I'd come in here and I have this little device. The vendor is MCT, board name USB to VGA. The driver, I believe, is supposed to be titled sysUSB. And I put in the USB bus ID. And maybe if I want to show that over here real quick, there is a command I can run, just ls USB, right keyboard. So there you can see Magic Control Technology, SVGA adapter, and then that ID 711900. I think this is the syntax to put that in over here. So I'm telling it use that as the device. Monitor, I don't need this monitor here. So monitor 1, device 1, don't need this. I'll let it auto, so I'll leave that like it is there. I'll turn off TRI2 if that's the right setting. That's all part of screen 1. And up here I'm saying that the first screen it should show as screen 1. So I'll write that, and now back over here in the actual interactive on the device itself. That config is there, and I can do a start X. And it doesn't find the screens. I can do a sudo start X. No screens found. I can go look at the log. And I can see up above screen 1, monitor 1, device 1, DRI2 is off, auto add is off. And then it gets down here, and this is probably where my problem is. It says it's trying to load the sysUSB, which I believe should be part of the kernel in the kernel, but maybe I need PCI for that. But anyways, it fails to load that. So that's I think where I'm stuck on that. And I'll see if I can also figure out how I would try to have this be my console output instead of the HDMI. Okay, that's where I'm going to stop. A little bit more information there, but I do have everything loaded in the kernel that's available for that. sys 3.3.15. I believe that is all loading in the kernel correctly, but I know over here it's not necessarily recognizing it. So maybe there's more I can do to test that. And then I think there's probably some boot args or something to try to use this USB to VGA as my console instead of the HDMI. Okay, thanks again.